So in this video, we're going to look at two really helpful aspects of the Accordance Bible software. We're going to look very briefly at the compare text function, which you can also configure to your own preferences in the settings. And then we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at the textual apparatus and how that helps us understand both the history of the text and also to dig a bit deeper into the decisions made by the translation committees for our modern translations of the Bible. So let's begin by firing up our copy of Accordance. And I'll make that full screen to give us a bit more real estate to work with. And I'll turn on my larger cursor as well, because that helps. But the first thing I want to do is to simply demonstrate the compare text function. So up here you have a number of options where you can click on and say you want text differences between a couple of texts to be compared. And of course you can also configure this either by going the longer way to your preferences, or if you've added the icon for preferences, you can click up here and then you can go into compare text, and you have a number of ways you can configure that. So I've told it to ignore uppercase, lowercase variations. I've told it not to pay attention to punctuation, because neither of those things are part of the original text. I could also tell it to ignore any differences between the Greek accents, and perhaps we will leave in differences that might be there with Hebrew pointing, and to suppress the cantillation marks, which are for when the Hebrew text is being chanted or sung in the synagogue. We don't need to see those. Okay, I've left the default, so text which has been replaced will have this cyan strike through. Text which has been inserted will have a heavy blue underline. Text which has been deleted, there'll be a vertical red line to say at this point something's missing. The texts which can be compared include, for the Old Testament, Biblica Hebraicus Tucatensia, and I can change that to make it consistent with the version that we're using, the Hebrew Bible ETCBC, Nestle Alarm 28 Greek New Testament, of course the NRSV with Strong's. I save that. What I've got here is Strong's Hebrew Bible Route. Now the first thing you're going to notice, and I'll turn off instant details. First thing you're going to notice is when I click compare, nothing happens because the texts are not in the same language. Okay, so if I come back here and instead, if I go compare and I choose the Dead Sea Scroll Bible canonical order, okay, bring it up a bit in size, so it more or less matches. Now when I click compare, it's going to compare the differences in the same language between the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scroll Hebrew text. And so it's noting quite a number of small differences there, where some text has been replaced and so on over time. Again, if I do want to compare, say the English differences between English translations, then I can come down to my English Bibles. I could put in the Jewish Publication Society translation of the Torah, which will be fine. Again, make it a little bit bigger. And then I could also put in, say, let's say the New Jerusalem Bible, which I kind of like. Okay. And again, I'll use the fonts thingies here to make it smaller or larger. Now when I click compare text, it'll compare two of them. Okay, so in this case, it can't compare three, that's too difficult. So it's chosen two of the text. The red mark is saying something has been deleted. The blue is telling us that something has been added, and the green means that something has been substituted or replaced with a different set of words. If I close that tab completely, Now I can compare NRSV and Jewish Publication Society, and if I can get them more or less lined up, you'll see it's a quick glance at the differences between the same passages in the same language. So I can't compare, obviously, Latin and Greek, English and Hebrew, Hebrew and Greek, but we can compare and get a quick visual feedback of some of the differences between texts in the same language, same passage, same language, and you can choose whether you're comparing words, lexical forms, which is digging a little bit deeper. So if we did lexical forms, that's not going to really work with an English text, of course. But if I was to make this Hebrew Bible, and if I was to make this Dead Sea Scrolls, then we're going to show up some of the differences between the Hebrew text in terms of lexical forms. Okay, and the other option there was tag. So we could do a search based on differences in the tagging. Obviously, for that to happen, both texts need to be tagged text, or else there'll be no tags to compare. So let's. The quickest way to reset actually is probably just to come back into workspaces, go into my Introduction to Biblical Language workspace. So there it is, back to our normal configuration. Now what I want to do is to have a little look at the sort of information we have down the bottom here in what will often be the Critical Apparatus section of your Accordance workspace. So again, I'm going to turn off the instant details, give us a little bit more space. So we're working here. What I want to do, I want to go into 1 Samuel, just need a capital, chapter 10. I want to go from verse 25 to chapter 11, verse 5, and bring the text up straight away. Okay, so we've got the text in the NRSV. We've got the text in the Hebrew Bible, and so on. So just as a really quick combination of the two skills, let me change this momentarily to an NIV translation. So it's NIV 1984 with reference numbers. And so we're starting at verse 25. Now let's turn on compare text. Aha. So we've got a few minor differences showing up. A couple of things have been deleted. Okay. One of the things that's being deleted here is this phrase down here, about a month later, that has disappeared from the text. But more importantly, you'll notice there's a whole section over here which is not represented in the NIV at all. It similarly was not represented in the King James Bible. Again, pull the size up a little bit. And it's also not there in the standard Hebrew text that we would normally be working with. Okay, and we go from verse 27. Some worthless fellows said, this is Amaru. Amar was the word we learned in week 1. How can this guy, how can we be saved by this guy? And they did not bring him any gifts, and he held his peace. He stayed silent about it. We get a similar phrase over here. And some sons of worthlessness said, how can he save us, this fellow? And they they despised him, and they did not bring to him a gift. And in the Greek, we don't get the bit about, but he held his peace. So we have some differences between the English, as we now have it, in a modern critical translation, the Hebrew text, the best edition of the Masoretic Hebrew text, and the ancient witness coming from the Greek Septuagint. And down the bottom we have critical apparatus. So we have some notes here. So I'm going to change to, I'm calling them translator notes. That's probably not quite what they are, but NRSV notes. They're the notes you'd find in the Bible. We've got the apparatus there for BHS. Over here we don't need Metzger's New Testament commentary. So let's go to the apparatus from Ralph's. So there's the critical apparatus. You'll notice, for example, in the Septuagint, it's not 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, followed by 1 Kings and 2 Kings, but it's 1st Book of Kings, 2nd Book of Kings, 3rd Book of Kings, 4th Book of Kings. So Regnorum 1 is 1 Samuel. Okay, so we're getting some differences, and the differences are actually pointed out here in the NRSV. You've got some notes here, and we've also got them down the bottom. If I was to scroll down, it would say 1 Samuel 10:27, Qumran manuscript compared with Josephus Antiquity 6, which is what this is based on. The Masoretic text lacks everything between now Nahash and entered Jabesh Gilead. So this whole paragraph is missing from the Masoretic text, and that's exactly the case. We don't have it over here. We also don't have it in the LXX. However, if I change this to the Dead Sea Scroll Bible, and again whack the font size up a little bit, then we're going to find that the words which were missing, so here's verse 27 starting here, coming along, and you know, there's some textual damage. It's not a totally good text, but the text comes to an end, and then in 4Q51, which is what we've been reading from all through here, 4Q51, document 51 from Cave 4 at Qumran, then we get, again, the square brackets show us where the text is damaged, but Nahash, Melech, B'nai Amim, or Ammon, Nahash, king of the Ammonites, and so on. So we've actually got this whole paragraph about Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, beating up on the tribe of Gad and Reuben. Okay, and here's Gad, and here's Reuben, and so on. Okay, so there's a whole paragraph which we haven't had in the Bible for 2,000 years. It's not in the Masoretic text, as we saw. It's not in the Septuagint, but it is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so one of the challenges for a Bible translation committee is, do they put this paragraph back into the Bible, given that it hasn't been in the Bible, either in the Hebrew or the Greek form of the Bible, for more than 2,000 years. Now, the paragraph makes a lot of sense. It helps explain what's going on here. It explains the reference about a month later that just didn't make sense previously when we had it. So the critical apparatus, in this case, the marginal notes in the NRSV, are pointing us to the textual variations, and we can go back in and you will see that, for example, the critical notes for the Hebrew Bible, and let's go to the apparatus for we'll just have to use the BHS apparatus. Okay, so the textual apparatus is telling us that there are some issues, but it's not telling us about this whole missing section. Similarly, the critical apparatus in this case is not helping us much, because it's the text which has been recovered has come from a copy of 1 Samuel found in Cave 4 at Qumran. But that's these symbols. If I drag this up, make this a bit bigger, these little things down the bottom help us get a sense of which documents and which ancient manuscripts have variations. Now, in the case of the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament in Hebrew, remember, prior to about 1000 of the Common Era, it's probably more like 900, but so let's say round about the 900s, so just over 1,000 years ago, and for 1,000 years before that, the only copies of the Hebrew Bible that have survived, okay, are the Masoretic text, Codex Leningrad, basically, and then, since 1948, the Qumran scrolls. So there was substantial loss and destruction of the Hebrew copies of the Old Testament, and that's largely because Christians had no interest in preserving them, because we had it in Greek and Latin and we weren't interested in the Jewish side. Now let's change track, and I just want to go into a more familiar bit of text. Let's go into Mark chapter 1. Now clearly we're not going to get Mark chapter 1 in the Hebrew Bible, so for the sake of comparison, let's drop it down into, say, the New Jerusalem Bible. Straight away you can see the compare text beginning to work, and we can see there's we're going to find some differences being reflected in the translations, and there's not too much we can do with these other texts just for the moment, but yes, we can put this back to Ralph's, not that we need that, and we'll put this back to Nestle Aland, back to our normal Greek New Testament. Okay, so when you start reading through, and this time looking at the apparatus, okay, we'll get there. So we've got the text there more or less lined up for us, and down the bottom we've got the NRSV notes. We've got, let's see if there's any notes for New Jerusalem Bible. I thought there would have been some notes, but I can't see them, so we'll just ignore that for now. Obviously that apparatus won't be relevant, so let's just close that. I know what I'm going to do. We're going to change this. I want to demonstrate a couple of other things. So we're still going to want the apparatus for the Greek New Testament in the end. So apparatus Nestle Aland 28. But I'm going to add two other tools, one of which you will have, and the other one you might want to think about getting at a later stage. So I'm going to add the Metzger, come back here, Metzger's text commentary, and I'm also going to add the tool which is called Comfort. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Comfort text commentary. Okay, I actually would prefer to have this over here, so it's underneath, directly underneath, and these other two can just be out of whack. Okay, so now when we look at the text, we can see that there are actually some issues. So let's come into, we're in the Nestle Aland here. Let's come down. It should actually be hooking. We don't want all this guff. We actually wanted to go turn off text, compare text perhaps. And okay, now it's kicked into where we are. Good. So it was trying to do a compare text, which it can't do. So we're in Mark chapter 1, kata markon. Markon, of course, that's accusative singular. Kata plus accusative, preposition kata plus the accusive form. This means according to Mark. Okay, it's not called the Gospel of Mark, it's the Gospel according to Mark. And as we go through, we come down into the bottom here. So Mark chapter 1, we've got the inscription, the inscriptio at the top, and then we've got verse 1. Okay, and again I'll bring this up a little bit higher because we're only going to look at the first sentence or so. So Mark chapter 1, and we've got the Son of God, and then we've got Jesu Christu. So we've got two different, you notice we've got Jesu Christu, both are genitive, singular, masculine endings, by the way. And then we've got Huiu Theu, Son of God, and Son of God is in square brackets. So it's in the text, but it's got square brackets, which means there was a question mark about it. And down the bottom we see all the ancient texts that actually have Son of God, okay, Huiu, well actually they have a longer form, Huiu Tu Theu, are these ones. And if you were to have your instant details on, or whatever, you can actually see them. I want to go, let's put the instant details back on for a moment. And unfortunately I've just got to now redo that. Come back down here again, apparatus, Nestle Alarm. Okay, so if I'm just moving my mouse over this, it'll tell me what these other references are in the instant details. Okay, and all the different manuscripts that have that reading, and then the ones which simply have Jesu Christu and do not have a reference to Son of God. And there's a list of them here. One of them is Codex Sinaiticus, which is, and it's the first hand in Codex Sinaiticus. And then we have Vaticanus, and we have what's called the Cambridge text or Western text, and so on. So by going into the apparatus, we get a very technical summary of which ancient manuscripts have this set of words or those sort of words when there's a variation. Now, one of the tools you have is Metzger's textual commentary, and he has, so here in chapter 1 of Mark, he has a conversation, a little discussion here, and he discusses what's the significance of the fact that Huiu Theu, Son of God, is missing from Sinaiticus and also from these other two very important manuscripts, okay? Which actually are not quite the same as the ones that are listed over here, but we have got this one, and which he's quoting, and so he's saying, well, it might just be an oversight because the nomina sacra that we mentioned the other week, the special abbreviations for the sacred names, could have led to some confusion. Okay, he goes backwards and forwards on that discussion, because in the end, most scholars have come back to say, well, probably it was in Mark, whoever wrote Mark's Gospel did intend to actually describe Jesus as the Son of God, because that is a really important point that he returns to at various times in his Gospel. The other thing you can pick up, and again, this is really using the apparatus well, this is coming from Comfort's textual commentary on the New Testament. Really useful tool. It doesn't come in the combination you have at the moment, but you'll notice we get lots of cross references to Westcott Hort. We get another one here to the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum, which is these quoting the 26th and 27th edition. We're working with the 28th edition. And it's NU because it's both the Nestle Aland and the United Bible Society. And so he's saying some references simply have, according to Mark, that's the inscription, sorry, let's come down to the verse 1, that's better. Okay, so same thing, Textus Receptus and the Nestle Aland United Bible Society. Some have all of this. I'll make it a bit bigger for you. Arche tu Evangeliu Jesu Christu Huiu Theu, beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. And we'll find that, and these ones actually add tu before Theu, and the English translations that follow that are all of these: King James, New King James, RSV, NRSV, ESV, New American Standard, etc., etc., etc. So it tells you straight away which modern English Bibles follow that reading. And then down the bottom we've got the variants. So one of the variants is simply to omit the phrase Son of God. And this is what we also find happening in Sinaiticus. We find it as well in this particular 9th century manuscript, so it's quite late, and we're finding it in the Coptic as well, and it's in the marginal readings of all these modern ones. Okay, and then there's another variant which simply says the beginning of the gospel, and it doesn't say either of Jesus Christ or Son of God. So, and then we have a lovely little discussion in Comfort, which you won't find in the apparatus itself. And this is why I think Comfort is well worth using from time to time. It should be on the copy of Cordon's in the library. This verse, without a verb, was either Mark's title for his gospel, It was he outlines the problems, the text critical problems, and how nonetheless most scholars do actually go with the longer form of the reading, even though normally we wouldn't do that. You'll see that he's actually quoting from the original copies with the nomina sacra, and if you've forgotten what that is, you put your cursor over it and the instant details will again tell you it's the sacred name abbreviations. So there's quite a detailed discussion there as to how it could have happened that Son of God might have dropped off, but he's also noting that there's issues with the way modern translations put punctuation in and so on. So the point there is just to remind you that there's a wealth of information, not only in the critical apparatus, which can be a bit technical, but also in these two really helpful commentaries which focus directly on the text of the New Testament. Metzger's commentary on the Greek New Testament and Philip Comfort's textual commentary on the Greek New Testament as well. So digging down into the critical apparatus, looking at those sort of commentaries, even before you get into the major commentaries, can really give you a heads up of what the issue is. And of course, as we've already seen, if there was something in Comfort, for example, that you wanted to copy across to your assignment, suppose you really liked a bit of his conversation, his discussion, I should say. Suppose you found this part here really quite convincing. Maybe down as far as there. Then of course you simply go in there, right click, copy as citation, and then you can paste that into your essay or into your notes, whatever the case may be. So the compare text is a very powerful tool, only works with up to 2 different versions of the same language. Much more powerful tool is to get down into the textual critical apparatus and actually pay some attention to all these fine details. Again, using the instant details, so as you go across anything which is blue and looks like a link, you're going to be able to see what it is without even going to look it up. So I hope that gives you a bit of a heads up in terms of how we can use compare text, and also how we can use the textual apparatus, which I'll put down the bottom of the page because that's how I prefer to work with it. I've also put it at the bottom of the page because that's where you would have found it had you been looking at an actual printed Greek New Testament or Hebrew Old Testament. Okay, good luck with that, and hope you have fun making really good use of this amazing tool.